I used to believe my life had finally settled into a gentle rhythm. After 30 years teaching third graders, I retired to the brick bungalow in Worthington, Ohio, that my late husband, Robert Hart, and I had paid off dollar by dollar. Sundays meant roast chicken, a phone call from my son Lucas, and the quiet hum of a house that knew my footsteps. When Lucas and his wife Camille began visiting, more often their concern felt like warmth. "Mom, this place is too big for you," Lucas said one evening, his hand covering mine. Camille added softly, "We could move in, help with the heavy stuff. And to avoid legal headaches later, maybe put the deed in Lucas's name just for protection." It sounded practical, even loving. I signed where the friendly notary pointed, grateful someone was thinking ahead. The first hairline crack appeared weeks later. Mail for Lucas and Camille started arriving before any change of address had been mentioned. My framed photos migrated from the hallway to a dresser drawer to freshen the space. At night, I was nudged upstairs. "You'll be more comfortable there, Mom," while the living room became theirs. One sweltering afternoon, I passed Robert's old den and froze. Lucas was on speaker with someone from a renovation company. "The transfer's done," he said. "Once she's out, we can open the second floor and list fast. Once she's out." The words lodged in my chest like a stone. I told myself I'd misheard. Then, near midnight in the kitchen, I heard Camille's low whisper, "She's starting to ask questions." Lucas answered, "I'll call tomorrow about power of attorney. We need control before she balks." The refrigerator hummed. I stared at the tile and felt the room tilt. At dawn, I called Mr. Adler, the attorney who had handled Robert's will. Hypothetically, I asked, if a deed is now in my son's name, but I still live in the house, what are my rights? Silence stretched. "Evelyn," he said gently, "you're there by permission. He can ask you to leave at any time." I walked the rooms I had memorized with my eyes closed, the kitchen where lunchboxes had been packed, the landing where Lucas had measured his growth against a pencil-marked wall, the bedroom where Robert had practiced the art of goodbye. Nothing had moved, and yet everything had shifted. My home was unchanged. My place inside it was not. By nightfall, the truth was no longer deniable. The kindness had been choreography, the paperwork a quiet erasure. I had invited betrayal to sit at my table and serve itself first. The morning the locks changed, I learned there are two kinds of silence. The first is the ordinary hush of a house at dawn, the kettle breathing the floorboards, stretching birds rehearsing their scales outside the kitchen window. The second is the silence after your child tells you through a gap in your own front door that this is for the best and closes the world on you like a book snapped shut. I stood on the porch in my robe, fingers still curved around a knob that no longer belonged to me, and watched the curtain drift back into place. A white envelope lay on the welcome mat. Sunset Crest Assisted Living intake papers, already filled in with my name. Somewhere inside my late husband's den was being measured for updates, my photos folded into boxes labeled "Messi." The house knew me, the paperwork didn't. By 10 o'clock, a transport van nosed up to the curb. The attendants were kind in the way people are kind to those who no longer get to decide. I said no. I said it without volume, but with weight, and then I walked to my Toyota Corolla, started the engine, and pointed the car toward nowhere in particular. I didn't have a plan beyond leaving only a thin idea that motion itself could be a kind of shelter. What I learned the first week is that being without an address rearranges the map you carry in your head. You stop seeing a town as neighborhoods and start seeing it as bathrooms, outlets, and corners where a security camera can't watch you sleep. The first night, I parked at the far edge of a 24-hour supermarket lot and pretended to be waiting for someone who was always just about to arrive. The second night, I tried a rest area off I-71, where trucks exhaled all night and fear kept time like a metronome. By the third, I'd worked out a circuit plug my phone in at the library wash up in a gas station sink, and end behind a diner that closed at 2 a.m., where the cook smoked in back and nodded to me like we were co-workers on a late shift. You learn numbers too. How many minutes you can stand under a hand dryer before your scalp stops prickling. How many hours before the ache in your lower back grows teeth. How many dollars it takes to buy coffee large enough to count as heat. I owned a pension and modest savings, but without a lease or utility bill, I was suddenly a customer who didn't exist. Hotels wanted deposits and the fiction of continuity. Apartments wanted credit checks and references I couldn't provide without admitting to the humiliation I was trying to hide. The world is organized around the assumption that you belong somewhere. When you don't, every counter becomes a test, you fail. I rationed my pride like toothpaste. In the mornings, I used the community center 3 towns over, where $10 a month and a smile bought me a locker and a shower that didn't judge. I folded myself into a stall and let the water talk so I didn't have to. People were polite about not seeing me. A woman lent me conditioner without asking questions. A teenager complimented my robe. An older man with a knee brace told me about his grandson. If invisibility was the price of being left alone, I paid in exact change. On day 5, I drove past my old street, the way we circle the worst memory because our feet don't trust our brains. Lucas's sedan sat in the driveway next to Camille's sleek car. The front door was open for a painter carrying drop cloths. Through the window, I saw our dining room stripped to lath floral wallpaper peeled in ragged flags. It was hard to tell whether grief or anger burned more oxygen. I turned the wheel before either could finish me. After 10 days, survival turned into routine. Library at 6, scan the local paper like I was still interested in municipal bond issues. Community center at 8, sit in a corner chair and blow dry my hair into the appearance of someone with plans. I learned which baristas didn't mind if you stretched a muffin across 3 hours. I learned to nap with my seat reclined and my purse tucked under my knees. I kept the radio off, music was too honest, and counted the railroad crossings on my way to nowhere as proof the day had happened. On day 14, the message arrived like a coin tossed into a well I hadn't realized was still in working order. The subject line read, "Evelyn, it's Sam." My older brother and I hadn't traded more than holiday postcards since Robert's funeral. He lived in deals and blueprints and cities that pronounced his last name with a certain respectful care. The email said he'd heard something from an old church friend of mine, rumor travels faster than time, and that he was flying to Columbus. "Meet me at the Levesque Tower lobby at noon," he wrote. "We need to talk." I almost didn't go. Pride again, that stingy little accountant. But pride doesn't buy gas, and it doesn't hold your head up when someone you love says the word sunset and means a place people wait to be managed. I wore my last clean outfit, pinned my hair in a style that tried not to look like an apology, and arrived at noon sharp because being on time is the last dignity no one can repossess. Sam looked different and exactly the same. The freckled kid who'd traded baseball cards under the maple tree had grown into a man whose suits had architecture. He hugged me hard enough to rattle the past. "Ev," he said, stepping back to take inventory the way big brothers do. What did he do? So I told him. Not the dramatic version, just the sequential one. The suggestion to protect assets. The smiling notary, the whispered plan to move me out the word, power of attorney, said like a solution. The door, the van, the lot lights that never turn off. Sam listened without interrupting, then put a heavy envelope on the table like a magician who despises flourish. "Keys," he said. And a deed. Bexley. Good schools, mature trees, a kitchen you'll pretend not to love. It's yours. I blinked stupidly. It felt like we'd skipped a chapter and were pretending the narrative still made sense. "Sam?" He slid a second envelope over. "Before you argue, there's a cashier's check." $3 million. I don't have a wife, I don't have kids, and I'm not interested in being the richest headstone in the cemetery. Let me do this while I'm around to enjoy your complaining. If you want to know what shock looks like in public, it looks like a woman sitting very still so nothing spills. I pressed my palms to the table to confirm it was real wood and not the part of the dream where your hands go through. Then I did the impolite thing and asked why now. Sam's face changed in the way a weather front changes. Same sky, different pressure. Because what Lucas did has a name, he said. And because I've been watching him angle for years. He didn't invent this week, he rehearsed it. He lifted his chin toward the envelopes. Consider this a course correction. If rescue is a dramatic word, then the days that followed were its quieter cousin repair. The Bexley house was as promised 3 bedrooms, a porch wide enough for a conversation, a yard that hummed with possibility. The first night I slept with the windows open to prove to my nervous system that fresh air could be something other than a parking lot's aftertaste. A neighbor waved from her garden the next morning and told me about trash day like I was ordinary. I cried in the pantry noiselessly for precisely 40 seconds, then made tea. Sam connected me with Clara Nguyen, a wealth manager who spoke about risk the way a good teacher speaks about fractions, clear patient with metaphors, sturdy enough to walk across. We looked at numbers together. With a conservative allocation, Clara said, you can live on the income and leave the principal untouched. Think $180,000 to $200,000 a year as a baseline. It was triple my old salary and more to the point, more than Lucas earned, even on a good year. I didn't gloat, I noted. The distinction mattered to me. I bought clothes that fit my new life without advertising it. A pair of sensible shoes that didn't look like surrender. A phone plan that wasn't prepaid. I traded the Corolla for a Volvo S90 that drove like quiet confidence and reminded me that safety can be elegant. The salesman kept glancing at my driver's license, then at Clara's letter, and I recognized the face of someone recalculating a story they'd already told themselves about me. What I didn't buy was vengeance, not yet. What I bought was time and information. On Sam's recommendation, I hired Renee Porter, a private investigator who'd spent 2 decades following money that didn't want to be found. I want a full picture of Lucas and Camille's finances, I told her. Every debt, every asset, every pressure point. And I need to know what's happening to my old house. Renee's fee used to be a number that would have made me sit down. Now it was a tool. She nodded, took notes in a hand that put each letter in its place, and gave me 2 weeks. Meanwhile, I called Mr. Adler to ask quietly what could be unwound. Fraud and undue influence are difficult to prove, he said, but not impossible. Keep records. Don't tip your hand. While the investigation simmered, I practiced being visible again. I joined a support circle for older adults who'd been cut off from family. I volunteered at the library, where I'd once rehearsed the role of patron with time to kill, and instead of hiding shelved books with a precision that felt nearly liturgical. I told a version of the truth when people asked, yes, there had been a difficult transition. No, I wasn't in assisted living. Yes, I was safe. I kept the sharper edges of the story for those who had earned them. 2 weeks later, Renee returned with a binder the color of stormwater and the kind of expression people wear when they bring you a diagnosis you already suspect. Your son and daughter-in-law are carrying about $700,000 in combined debt, she said, flipping to a page that translated adult lives into columns. Credit lines, personal loans, a second mortgage on what was supposed to be an investment property. They've been using balance transfers to float the minimums, but the juggling is getting sloppy. I listened without interrupting. It helps to have taught for 30 years you learn to hold a silence without rushing to fill it. Renee tapped another page. They've bet everything on selling the house you used to live in. They've taken out a bridge loan they can only service if the sale closes quickly and at the number they've promised their bank. Any delay, any problem with permits or inspections, and the timeline collapses. Their lender has notices queued up like dominoes. I thought of the open front door and the painter carrying the room where we'd eaten Thanksgiving. So they need speed, I said. They need the story to be simple and sympathetic. They need you, Renee said, to be compliant or absent. I closed the binder gently, as if waking a sleeping thing is rude. Relief isn't the right word for what I felt. Relief suggests something heavy being lifted off you. This felt like something heavy being named, which is different and better. When you name a weight, you can decide where to put it. I made tea. I do that when I think. It gives my hands something to do while my mind tucks corners. Lucas and Camille's plan wasn't particularly original. It was merely confident that I would be predictable. They had counted on my fear, my loneliness, and the social script that says, "Mothers forgive before breakfast." They had underestimated the part of me. Robert fell in love with the part that keeps a gradebook accurate to the half point and notices when a story has one too many tidy endings. I stood at the back window and watched a pair of cardinals interrogate the feeder. The yard didn't know anything about betrayal or escrow. It only understood seed and light. I exhaled. I wasn't going to let bitterness write the rest of my paragraphs. But I also wasn't going to donate the lesson to people who had earned the test. So I made a list in a spiral notebook that still smelled like glue. Step 1, secure my own footing. Documents accounts locks. Step 2, maintain a low profile while gathering proof. Step 3, decide which levers to pull and when not to scorch the earth just to change the weather. Teachers do this all the time, not punishment exactly, structure, consequences, timing. That night, I slept 8 hours for the first time in 2 weeks because the turning point had arrived and it looked nothing like triumph. It looked like clarity. The next move would be mine. By the time autumn pressed its thumb into the maples of Bexley, I had a ritual that felt like ownership. I brewed coffee strong enough to carry a thought, slid open the back door, and let the morning step into the kitchen. The feeder outside had become a small democracy, cardinals and finches arriving in orderly bursts, and the order of it soothed me. It reminded me why I wasn't rushing toward payback. Teachers don't punish, they structure. Consequences are just the quiet math of choices. The first structure was safety. Clara and Nguyen. My wealth advisor nudged our plan into place with the precision of someone who enjoys numbers more than adjectives. Statements were consolidated beneficiaries, updated documents scanned and duplicated. My name and my access were braided so tightly together that no one could separate them again without a court order and a miracle. We set a modest discretionary budget, and I kept to it like a syllabus. Power. I discovered doesn't always feel like fireworks. Sometimes it feels like sleep. The second structure was sight. I drove past my old house in Worthington once each afternoon, never at the same hour, never from the same approach. The lawn was newly shorn in a way that shouted rather than spoke. A dumpster sat in the driveway, exhaling the ghosts of drywall and floral wallpaper. Through open windows, I could hear the reckless cheer of demolition hammers insisting that the past could be simplified with enough banging. Renee Porter called every few days with patient updates. They're carrying roughly $700,000 in combined obligations, she said during one check-in. Her voice, the steady metronome of bad news, counted carefully. Credit card ladders, a personal line, at high interest, and a second mortgage on a rental that isn't performing. They've been floating minimums with balance transfers. The pattern is wobbling. Another day. They signed a purchase agreement with a buyer closing contingent upon completing the renovation by December 1st. Miss the date, and there's a $50,000 penalty. Their bridge financing assumes that timeline. I didn't have to ask about the work itself. Renee volunteered it anyway. unpermitted plumbing reroutes, electrical that won't pass inspection as is. A wall moved without an engineer's stamp. She paused. A single inspection could stop everything. I thanked her and went to find a quarter. The call was made from a payphone outside a gas station on Broad Street because I liked the ceremony of it, the way you have to push a real button to summon help. "I'm a neighbor," I said, adopting the airy concern of someone who clips HOA rules to their fridge. There's heavy construction at Maple Ridge Drive late into the evenings. I haven't seen posted permits, and I'm worried about safety. The city clerk was polite, asked precise questions, and promised a site visit. I returned the receiver to its cradle and let the sound of the click resolve through me. 3 days later, the city's white truck pulled in like punctuation. 2 inspectors walked the front path with clipboards and the slow, implacable gaze of people who know which paragraph of the code you violated before you open the door. I parked half a block away and watched the conversation happen through my windshield, in gestures my son Lucas making a show of surprise, Camille on her phone, the inspectors pointing, then pointing again. By the end of the week, the contractors were gone, and the coming soon sign vanished as if it had never been planted. I didn't clap. I went home and baked a pan of cornbread for the widow next door because triumph shouldn't be an only child. Meanwhile, I adjusted my public face the way you adjust a hemline, subtle but enough to change the silhouette. At the library, where I now volunteered 2 mornings a week, I shelved returns and learned the town's temperature from the circulation desk, who was moving, who was ill, who had switched churches. I joined a support circle for older adults navigating estrangement. There, I said almost everything but the word revenge. It wasn't a lie. I was aiming for something slower and narrower truth with timing. The town obliged with its own theater. In the cereal aisle at the grocery store, I bumped into Owen, a colleague of Lucas's all elbows and easy sincerity. "Your son's been under a lot of stress," he said, gravely confidential. "The situation with you, transitioning you to more support, he worries. He's a good guy." I tilted my head, let my mouth find the soft curve of a smile that wasn't agreement, and replied, "Change is complicated. People will work very hard to supply a narrative if you give them a single polite syllable to hang it on." Renee's binder thickened. So did the sensation new to me of steering instead of bracing. When building citations landed at Lucas's office, Renee had confirmed he'd used his work address on permit paperwork. The timing shaved 2 entire months off their schedule. Permits to apply for licensed professionals to hire bad decisions to unmake. The bridge loan didn't care about their feelings. Interest accrued like a second heartbeat. One Friday at dusk, I parked across from my old front window and watched the silhouettes. No date night this week. The restaurant clothes stayed on their hangers. Inside movement had the agitated geometry of an argument, someone pacing, someone sitting too still, a hand slicing the air to mime a problem that refused to be smaller just because you named it louder. I left before it became unseemly. Vengeance can turn a person into a voyeur. I intended to remain a witness instead. At home, I put the kettle on and opened a spiral notebook. I drew 3 columns leverage risk timing. Under leverage, I wrote inspections deadlines narrative. Under risk escalation exposure, the possibility that anger might make me clumsy. Under timing, I wrote only one word: December. The thing about having taught for decades is that you recognize patterns of panic. Children who cheat on spelling tests don't usually do it because they love letters. They do it because they're late to the assignment, or they internalized the wrong scoreboard, or they forgot that the point of the exercise is to be teachable. Adults aren't different. Lucas hadn't tripped into cruelty. He'd practiced it small self-justifications braided into bolder ones until the rope was strong enough to haul his mother to the curb. My plan wasn't to cut the rope in a flourish. It was to make him feel its weight. For myself, I chose small luxuries that didn't need to be confessed. A well-made winter coat, a haircut that remembered my cheekbones' sheet music for hands that had forgotten their fluency. I enrolled in a weekday Tai Chi class at the community center. Moving slowly on purpose is a lesson your body can teach your brain when your brain is tired of being brave. Renee's last update of the month arrived with a tone that said we were nearing a threshold. They've done enough unpermitted work that undoing it will require inspections at each step, she said. Even if they cooperate starting now, hitting December 1st involves overtime they can't afford. The buyer's agent has already asked for a status check twice this week. And the penalty, I asked though, I could have recited it in my sleep. $50,000 if they miss. Their cash flow doesn't have it. I thanked her. After we hung up, I stood in the doorway and watched dusk replace the yard with its shadow version. If bitterness tried to audition, I didn't call it back. Clarity had the role. On Sunday, I sat beside Marjorie at church, a woman whose weathered hands made even a hymnal look cared for. She squeezed my fingers once the way old friends say paragraphs without sound. At coffee hour, when someone asked how I was doing, I told the truth and withheld the rest. I am safe, I said. I am learning patience. It felt less like performance and more like policy. The week turned, and with it, the balance. I could feel it the way you feel a thunderstorm before the first drop pressure, changing static, collecting at the ends of your hair. Lucas sent no messages, which told me nearly as much as a confession would have. People in a corner stopped narrating because narration requires breath. I set the notebook back on the counter and capped my pen. The next step wasn't a call or a letter. It was waiting the hardest assignment to grade and the easiest to get wrong. But I had time. I had the city's calendar, the bank's calendar, and a mother's memory of a boy who once believed rules were there to keep him safe. Somewhere under the man who moved my photographs into a drawer lived that boy. I wasn't planning to rescue him. I was planning to ensure that when the lesson arrived, it would be unskippable. The house settled around me new, but no longer a stranger. I turned off the light and let the dark learn my name. The call from Renee Porter arrived on a cold Saturday, the kind of morning that makes even good news sound solemn. Evelyn, she said we have more than debt and missed permits. Papers rustled on her end. Your son Lucas submitted inflated income statements to secure the construction loan. And there are 8 revolving accounts opened with your name and signature, only the signatures aren't yours. Estimated exposure about $200,000. I sat down at the kitchen island because objects with edges help when sentences don't. What does that mean in plain terms? It means bank fraud. Renee said not unkindly. Identity theft. Potential federal attention if this becomes a complaint. She paused. I have copies of the application's timelines and the lender contacts. It's a clean trail. I thanked her, wrote 3 words in my notebook, proof leverage mercy, and made tea I barely tasted. That Thursday at dusk, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen since summer, Lucas. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then answered. Mom. His voice was thinner than I remembered, scraped by too many sleepless nights. I know there's been confusion. The house is almost there, but inspector's paperwork, look, it's complicated. I just need a little help bridging the gap. $50,000, short term. We'll sell and I'll pay you back immediately. My thumb found the edge of the counter. I pictured the December 1st deadline in Renee's binder, the $50,000 penalty waiting like a trapdoor. Why don't you come visit? I said evenly. We can discuss it in person. He agreed so quickly, it felt like relief falling downstairs. Saturday at 2 sharp, the bell chimed. I had opened the curtains and set out a modest tea service. Nothing ornate, nothing that would feel like gloating, and placed a manila folder on the coffee table. When I opened the door, Lucas stood there, holding a bouquet of white roses. He'd given the same flowers at Robert's funeral. They used to mean reverence. Now they meant rehearsal. He crossed the threshold and stopped. The Bexley house doesn't shout, but it doesn't whisper either. High ceilings, clean lines, light that takes its time crossing the room. I watched a calculation move behind his eyes. Location, square footage, how? Mom, he said slowly. This isn't assisted living. No, I said. It isn't. He sat on the edge of the sofa like furniture might revoke the invitation. I poured tea, slid the sugar toward him, and let politeness do its job, give us both a script, while we chose a truth. I'm glad you called, I began. There are a few items we should clear up before we talk about lending you money. Mom. I didn't say. First, I said, opening the folder, these are the loan files from Buckeye First Bank. Your stated income is nearly double your actual salary. That's not a rounding error, that's fraud. Color rose and then fled from his face. The broker said, second, I continued laying out photocopies of credit applications, 8 accounts bearing my name, my address, and not my signature. $200,000 in cash advances and balance transfers. That's not confusion, that's theft. He stared at the pages as if the fonts had betrayed him. I was going to fix it. Once the house sold, third, I said, turning to Renee's timeline. Unpermitted electrical plumbing reroutes, structural changes without an engineer's stamp. You were warned. The site visit stopped work because it had to. That is not the city persecuting you. That is the code protecting the people who will live under that roof. He put his head in his hands, elbows on knees, the posture of a boy caught with a cheat sheet, and certain the punishment will be public. For a second, I saw him at 10, at 16, at 25, always a step faster with a story than with the truth. You could take this to the police, he said finally, voice frayed. To the bank, to a lawyer. I said. I thought of Mr. Adler and his gentle precision. I thought of forms and statements and the quiet bureaucracy of consequence. But I asked myself what I wanted, not what I could prosecute. He looked up hopeful and afraid at the same time. You want to help me. I know you do. What I want, I said, and kept my tone level, is for you to understand cause and effect. You engineered this situation. You manipulated my trust. You wrote a narrative in which your mother would be docile or gone. You misread the character. He winced as if the word character had sharp corners. I am not pressing charges today, I went on. I am not giving you money. I am not signing anything. I am not calling your employer. I am putting the following terms on the table and they are not negotiable. He nodded because he didn't know what else to do. 1. You will stop using my name, address, or likeness in any financial context, immediately. 2. You will return every personal item of mine that remains at the Worthington house. Place them in labeled boxes. I will arrange pickup. 3. You will sign a written acknowledgement that the deed transfer occurred under circumstances I dispute and that I reserve all legal remedies. 4. You will not contact me about money again. His mouth opened, then closed. If I agree, will you? I will do nothing more than I have just said. I held his gaze. I won't be drafted into your rescue. I already survived the part you scripted for me. He stood, then sat, then stood. Again the choreography of someone whose body can't find a decision. The white roses slipped in their paper wrap and spilled onto the rug, petals breaking their edges on the nap like small, quiet explosions. Where did this place come from? He asked, finally sweeping a hand at the room, as if the house itself were the offense. From Sam, I said, and so did the security that allows me to be calm with you now. I let that settle. Consider that a mercy you didn't earn. He swallowed. Mom, I'm sorry. I know, I said. You're sorry that the plan is collapsing. You're sorry you have to stand here and speak to the person you wrote out of it. You're not yet sorry for the part where you decided my life belonged to your timeline. He flinched, but he didn't argue. You have choices, I said. You can sell at a loss. You can call the buyer and renegotiate. You can declare bankruptcy. You can call a lawyer before a prosecutor calls you. Those are adult choices. Make them. He picked up the papers, then set them down again when he realized they weren't his to hold. When he walked to the door, he stepped around the fallen roses like a man avoiding evidence. At the threshold, he turned. For a heartbeat, the face I knew surfaced the one that used to bring me dandelions with roots attached. "Will you, can we?" "Not today," I said. I opened the door. "Take the flowers if you like." He didn't. The white roses stayed where they had fallen. After the driveway emptied, the house inhaled. I gathered the petals into a bowl and placed it on the mantel, a small monument to what symbols can't fix. Then I called Sam. "It's done," I said. He didn't ask for details. He knows how endings work. You leave the door on its hinges. You leave the lesson standing. I wrote one more line in the notebook: "Justice is not spectacle." Then I closed it and let the evening be quiet, which is different from silence. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.